and welcome to episode 25 of Skeptic Smash Talk. I'm your host, Jason Jones, and joining me once again is my very special co-host, Andy. Welcome back, Andy.
Hi there. Special.
You have a job.
Sorry. You may have noticed that Jason says fuck a lot, so please be aware of that. This podcast is classified as explicit, so if you are easily offended, it's probably best you turn off now.
If you want to get in touch, you can find all the contact information at skepticsmashtalk.com. And finally, if you want to help support the show, please go to iTunes or your favourite podcast app and leave a 5-star review, and continue to share the show and the details with all your friends on all your favourite social networks. So now, let's get on with the show. So we've had quite a few new listeners join over the last week or so. So welcome, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the podcast. Now, Andrea, how are you? You look all nice and relaxed. What have you been up to?
Yeah, I am relaxed. My head is slightly mushed. I've spent a whole entire day at yoga school, as I call it.
Or hippie school.
Do you know what? I would so love you to spend a day at the yoga bank for a whole day watching us on our course. It's just not like, I suppose, a typical, no, it might be wrong for me to say that, typical skeptic mind would think.
But it's not a yoga class you're going to, is it? You're actually doing a...
I'm doing the foundation course, British Wheel Yoga foundation course, and
right.
Today was actually a lot of... we tend to do some theory, and then we'll break down some of the practices to make sure you do them safe and learn about the anatomy, but today was a lot of philosophy. But yeah, it's a good mix of students, actually. Do you know? It's made up of so many different types of people. Some actually are reading when we were going through a lot of philosophy in the sutras, and some are like, oh, I just think that's total bollocks, and
yeah.
Other people are like, oh my god, that's a head wreck, that, you know, and trying to get it round how it would fit into their lives in this world. And it's it's a really good mix of people.
I guess that's why I probably couldn't deal with it, because I couldn't shut my mouth as soon as somebody started talking about they've healed their whatever with some crystals and their chant did this and their chakra did that. I couldn't bite my tongue. I would have to say something.
Yeah, but it's not a case of staying quiet. Talk, you know, and that person may come back and you may be totally, what planet are you on? But it's, you know, it's open for discussion. The whole thing is about debating and talking it out. And it's really, you know, we'll have somebody that believes in crystal healing, which a couple do. And I mean, me myself, I don't personally, but that's from, I have nothing to ground on how it could possibly work. You know what I mean? I've nothing there to... I have to...
You've got that critical thinking sort of...
I mean, you've got people there that think, oh my God, I've tried this and I don't understand. Maybe it's my mind playing tricks on me, and they don't want to believe something and they are doing it.
But it's all a philosophy too, isn't it? It's not really a religion as... most people see
No. I think the problem is because a lot of the ancient texts relate to God. It's not so much. I mean, that they talk about gods and they are stories. I mean, they are mythical creatures and stories at which some people just find it interesting. And I mean, it's not a case of bowing down to a god. It's a way of just, I suppose, finding a good way of living through life. And I mean, some want the ultimate goal of enlightenment, don't they?
Yeah. But I think, and I'm happy to be corrected by anybody who knows better, but from what I understand, especially with the Hindu gods and the Buddhist gods, they use the word God in a completely different context as what the Western world would call a god. So we think of God as the all-being, the creator, and all that sort of nonsense, where other people see gods, well, Hindus and Buddhists and the Eastern philosophy see gods as something completely different. Yeah,
I mean, my yoga teacher actually summarised something quite well, actually. She's brilliant in terms of how she explains things, and she wants you to think for herself. She says it every single, time we get together. It's, don't... I'm not some guru sat here talking to you. It's, use your own critical thinking. And she does say herself, like, you either believe you're the be end and end all and that's it, or you believe that there's something else out there, whether it's, Mother Nature or something that we haven't yet, fathomed, or whether you are literally the highest of all and you are the being and that's it. It's how you work that round your head. But yeah, my head's just mushed actually just talking about it again now, because I've had a whole day of it.
So it's not relaxing.
I'm actually... you need to go to one of these ladies' yoga classes. You'd be sweating and shaking.
Yeah. Anyway, so just to finish this off, because we need to get on with the show, but I wanted to paint a picture. Now, if you go to skepticsmashtalk.com and go into the blogs, you'll see some photo of what I call the studio, but let's face it, it's just one of the back rooms of the house with a heap of computer equipment and recording equipment. So I'm sat at the desk running the controls, and the enlightened one here is sitting in the lotus position on the floor as we record, and I think that's awesome.
Yeah, diversity.
Okay, so Andrea, we'll get on to the first story. Now, do you remember Clockboy Ahmed Mohammed?
Oh, yes, the inquisitive little genius.
Genius, that's the one. Well, he was a guy, he made a clock at home and took it to school to show his teacher because he was really, really proud of it. Well, his family have filed a lawsuit against the school that accused him of building the bomb. So the news story reads, the 14-year-old's family say the teenager's civil rights were violated after he was interrogated, arrested and suspended from school for bringing the homemade clock to class.
Do you know, when you think about it, it was obviously really made up with his, what he had done and wanted to go take it in and show people.
That's
so
right,
take aside the whole racial and just absurdity of what they did, that would have been crushing for a child of that age.
Exactly, and that was the original story. Was along those lines, as I recall, that he was so impressed that he had made this that he couldn't wait to take it in to school to show his teacher.
If she was a teacher and a child came to you and they did that in their own time, you'd be like, oh my God, that's fantastic, well done, wouldn't you? We'll
get on to the reason why in a moment. Anyway, the rest of the story reads that Ahmed, who was 13 at the time, now, okay, I've got to stop myself there. This is as reported in the Independent, and I'm a bit pissed off how they've actually written this, and I'll read it verbatim. Ahmed Mohammed, the then 13-year-old, who brought a ticking clock into his class. They felt the need
to pay ticking clock. Oh, dear God.
I know. That annoys
just say ticking bomb, why don't you?
Yeah, that's what they're heading for, wasn't it?
Oh.
Anyway, so they say that he brought his clock, to put it correctly, into class and was mistaken for a bomb, and they've accused the school of violating his civil rights in a lawsuit that was filed in Irving, Texas. And we've got a lot of listeners in Texas, by the way.
Oh, right, okay.
Second biggest in America, biggest state. Yeah. Not important to this story anyway. And MacArthur High School suspended the teenager for 3 days, even though the school had dropped the charge of possession of a hoax bomb.
The clock?
Yes. I'm literally speechless, and every time I've thought about this story, I've been quite speechless, because this kid... Now, I made things as a kid. I connected wires and I don't think I've ever told you this story. I actually thought that I made a doomsday device once as a kid, and I was in primary school, so I was 10 or something like that, and everything was connected to a sewing machine. There was nothing actually plugged into anything, but I just created this monstrosity that was based around a sewing machine, and hit a button. At the very moment that I hit a button, we had an earth tremor. And I thought that I caused it, and I was shitting myself for days because I was 10 years old.
Can you imagine if you'd done that
now? I know. Anyway, back to this very stressing story. So MacArthur High School suspended the teenager for 3 days, and they dropped the charges, which still amazes me. Anyway, the school can charge people is amazing, but the lawsuit cites a number of severe disciplinary actions against black students and a history of anti-Muslim feeling in Irving to support the case that Ahmed was racially profiled and discriminated against.
Well, I think it's quite obvious he was discriminated against and racially profiled. right from the beginning.
And the reason I mentioned the amount of listeners that we do have in Texas is that I really love for anyone around Irving to actually get in touch, send us an email, and let us know if this is the case. Is there still this racial tension in the area? Anyway, back to the story. So if we remember rightly, the case prompted President Barack Obama to write, "It was a cool clock" on Twitter, and President Obama said, "We should inspire more kids like you to like science. It's what makes America great." Now, the science fan, the kid Ahmed, was interrogated alone by police and the school principal for over an hour before he was arrested.
That is so wrong.
And he's
so
13 years old.
So wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, you just don't want to start with this story, really, do you?
No.
The fact that individuals are really that paranoid, the fact that he'd done such a great thing and built a clock, and the fact that he was interrogated on his own. I mean, it's just, ugh.
Yeah. Anyway, so Ahmed has said, "I've lost my innocence. I can never look at the world again the same way. I like science, but I look like a threat because of my brown skin." So the family moved to Qatar in October last year, but come back to Texas over the summer and hired the same law firm that is representing a Baylor University student whose school reportedly told her that she had violated the school's honor code after she reported her alleged rape. What is going on in these schools?
I wonder what's going on in people's minds. I mean, it's just... I'm actually speechless, you know. Yeah. I really am. I just feel like people have been so conditioned by moron... I can't even think of a word. It's just that ridiculous. Yeah. You know, where is the free-thinking people?
Yeah, but it gets worse or better depending how you want to see this part. And I'm still on the fence. So let me just finish this last part off. So the Irving Independent School District and city officials have yet not commented on Ahmed's family lawsuit, which does not include a specific figure of compensation. But in November last year, his family demanded $15 million compensation and written letters of apology. Otherwise, they would file the lawsuit. And that's where I don't agree.
Do you know what? I think there's got to be some shock tactics for this story not just to disappear off the face of the earth. Because people read this story, what was it, last year?
Yeah.
And it's so easy to forget. I mean, can anybody remember the family that went to go to Florida and then they got told they couldn't go? I mean, yeah, that got forgotten.
Yeah, and no, I get that, but $15 million.
But that was, I mean, is that just to raise? Yeah, you know what? Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but you know what? That kind of shock tactic, they're definitely not going to have gone along with that. So it takes them to court. This raised the profile of the whole issue. Yeah. I think it's greed.
I'm okay with if a court gives damages at whatever figure, I'm okay with. What annoys me though is that if there's a figure that's, let's say they did settle at $15 million, how much of that would have gone to Ahmed or his family, and how much actually goes into the lawyer's pockets? That's what pisses me off a lot with these things, because they get their fair chunk. But if it's awarded by the courts, and I don't agree with that system, but if that's a system that's in place and everybody knows the rules, that's fine. That there's a system in place, and if the courts award $15 million or whatever they award, that's fine. But when somebody demands the money, otherwise they will sue, that's where I start to really
I understand.
Because how far is that from blackmail?
No, I do agree with you on that score. I do think that's it's wrong. It's very wrong. I mean, I've no doubt that if you think about somebody at the age of 13, how they're affected by what happens in their life at that age. So whether he's now, you know, scared of his own shadow, you know, going out in public or going to school, and it's not like they've had to move to Qatar as well.
Yeah.
You know, their life's been flipped, and his growing up at that age, his adolescence has been severely affected by that. you know?
Yeah.
I mean, he probably gets a sweat on every time he goes through security at an airport now.
Well,
which
they profile, you know. They say that they don't profile, but there's when we went to, where did we go to? Germany. And one of our friends, I won't mention her name, but she could look like she's got brown skin. She certainly hasn't, but if she gets a bit of a tan, her skin looks a little bit brown. And whenever she goes through the airport security, when she's been out in the sun, she gets pulled up and they put the sniffers on her and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I definitely think the compensation, the whole, you know, demanding that or else, yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
But one thing this has done is just dragged them through a court case that they wouldn't have wanted, and I think something needs to be done about it, and it needs to be proven that they were wrong in doing what they were doing, and it shouldn't be able to happen again to another child.
No. On the upside, like you say, this does now get press attention, and when it first happened, so NASA and Google, and I think Twitter, I might be wrong on Twitter, invited him to come to the offices, and he was invited to meet the president at the White House, and hopefully now that this is back in the news, I mean, he's a little bit older now, hopefully some of the tech companies are looking at him and thinking, we need to keep an eye on this kid and maybe, you know, forget about the money, forget about the compensation. I think his family's okay as far as money's concerned anyway. I don't want to make any assumptions on that, but that aside, it's expensive now, especially in America, to get an education. Now, I hope one of the big tech firms are looking at him and saying, well, we'll pay for your education. You keep, you know, doing what you're doing and you get in and you get into MIT, which he's probably, that's, you know, he's that smart that he'll get into MIT and he'll get his master's and he'll probably get a PhD in whatever he wants to do because he's a smart kid. I just hope that he does that and he doesn't get locked up in all the bullshit that's involved now where if you're brown, you're the bad guys. And you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I mean, it definitely needs to be publicised and people need to realise that they've got to lay back on judgments and take each person for who they are.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next story. Okay, so this next story comes from the Raw story, and it relates to an article in the New Scientist, and it reads, an article in the New Scientist magazine recently cautioned parents and schools not to allow children to visit a Noah's Ark theme park in Kentucky, citing scientific errors and an underlying message that praises the obliteration of humans. Okay, so this is the thing that I think everybody has heard of by now. It's the one thing that was imagined up by fellow expatriotic Antipodean Ken Ham. You may remember him from such debates when Bill Nye the Science Guy handed Ham his ass on the plate in the debate a few years back when the debate question was, is creation a viable model of origin? Which, of course, the answer is a resounding no, especially given the age of the fossils that Bill collected on his way to the actual debate, or the simple mathematics that shows that we would need to be discovering new species of animals faster than we could name them on a daily basis to account for the capacity of the biblical ark and the count of fauna on the planet today. More of this in a moment. Let's just go back to the story. So, in a column published by New Scientist last week, evolutionary biologist Josh Rosenau of the US National Center for Science Education explained that parents should look beyond the Ark Encounters petting zoo when deciding whether to allow children to attend. In fact, it is a hardcore creationist extravaganza replete with pseudoscience. He went on to say it's no place for a field trip, and perhaps because of disappointing visitor numbers so far, it is offering reduced rates at $1 a student and free tickets for accompanying teachers to tempt school children through its doors. Schools and parents should know that a visit wouldn't educate or entertain, it would misinform and browbeat, Rosenau wrote. Now, if you haven't heard me say it before, you will now, and you will hear it from me often. This really is one of my biggest issues that I have with religion. And I mean all religions, not just the crazy ones that believe that 6,000 years ago humans were riding T-Rex bareback after some guy ate some fruit that his interventionist and omnipotent and vengeful creator told him not to eat, but some snake also created by the interventionist and omnipotent and vengeful God, convinced him to eat. My problem is that they brainwash children with this crap. Worse than that, they, in some cases, very literally beat it into kids. And if they don't follow the doctrine, the kids this is, they're told they will burn in the fiery pits of hell. So back to the story. Rose now said everything in the park is designed to promote scientifically impossible ideas that contradict everything that scientists know, from astrophysics to zookeeping. The visitor is deluged with misinformation. It may be impossible to find a single sign in the park that is free of scientific errors. But it was the Ark Encounter's more subtle form of indoctrination that really disturbed Rosenau. He said the relentless message to visitors is that our world is as fallen and wicked as Noah's, and that the destruction of the flood, including the obliteration of all humans other than the virtuous few, was not just acceptable but praiseworthy. Rosenau lamented that under the pretense of illustrating a beloved tale shared by Jews and Christians and Muslims and others, Ark Encounter presents a message as socially divisive as it is scientifically inaccurate, instilling fear, hatred and hopelessness. Rosenau finishes with, those are lessons no school or parent should want their students or children to take on board. Amen, brother. Now, the debate itself is on YouTube and is very easy to find, and Bill Nye has written a brilliant book in relation to the debate, and as per normal, the links to there will be in the show notes. And I'll try to remember to put the debate video itself on the skepticsmashtalk.com blog section. So if you cast your mind back a few years, maybe even 3 years now, there was talk about the discovery of some sort of alien megastructure being discovered. And as you can imagine, this was being reported as being, I think, from a Death Star type situation or a Dyson sphere, or maybe even just something as simple as an oddly arranged meteor belt. And as much as there's no evidence for any of these, I'm not for 1 second completely ruling out the Death Star, but Occam's razor suggests that it may be something a little more naturally occurring than an alien megastructure. But again, nobody actually really knows for now. But let's have a bit of a refresher. The star, known as Tabby's star, is 1,480 light years away. For those doing the math at home, that means that if there was some sort of alien megastructure around Tabby's star, and some alien called Greg happened to be looking through his iPad camera telescope app, because let's face it, if they can build an alien megastructure, they can build a decent camera for an iPad, right? Anyway, so Greg, the alien, is looking at Earth via his iPad scope. What he would be looking at is the light that left the Earth in the year 535 or 536. And what would he have seen? Well, practically nothing, as this was the year that the upper atmosphere of planet Earth was veiled in some sort of dust that blocked most of the light from the sun hitting the late Iron Age inhabitants on the surface. Now, there are several assumptions as to the cause of this, with some suggesting an extraterrestrial impact such as a comet or meteorite, but most agree that it was probably the result of a volcanic eruption or eruptions, with some scholars suggesting that dust didn't settle until well into the 550s. Unfortunately, at the same time, Europe was being devastated by what may have been the bubonic plague that had taken out half of Europe's population and nearly a quarter of the world's population. So even if the iPad scope had infrared capabilities, all Greg the alien would have seen is starvation from failed crops and death from pandemic diseases. So I can't imagine that Greg would have opened up his WhatsApp app and shot a message to Earth just to say g'day for our buddies at SETI to pick up. But maybe the wow signal in 1977 was Greg the alien taking a selfie of planet Earth as Cedric of Wessex was landing on the south coast of England. That in itself is another mystery that will probably remain unsolved. Which leads me to my point. There's been a bit of chatter lately about the benefit or no benefit of SETI or any other extrasolar exploration. I've talked last week about the beginning of private missions to the moon, so it won't be long until private missions go long beyond the Oort cloud. But the question remains, should we keep looking for the little green men? They haven't said shit to us since 1977, so maybe it's a waste of effort. But what if every time we point at something, we are hitting them right at the time of some disaster, or all their radio networks are down? What if we are doing it at the same time they are doing the Greg the Alien version of Earth Hour? What if, and I think this is the most likely explanation, they stopped using primitive radio waves millennia ago? We know there's so much more in the universe that we can't see. In fact, we cannot see or hear 95.1% of what is in our universe. And it's not that it's trying to hide from us, we just don't know how to see it yet. We know it's there. Even if you can't see something, the effects of gravity shows us it is there, and the works of Einstein and Newton and many more brilliant men and women give us the math that prove that it's there. We just can't see it. Here's the thing though. You humans have 3 types of colour receptive cones in your eyes. Now, I'm not an eye expert. I don't want to fuck this up too much, but just think of it this way. 3 types of cone, 1 type each for red, green and blue. So what we can see in the most basic of forms is any colour that a combination of red, green and blue can make. On the other hand, dogs only have 2 types of cones, and while they are not colourblind, as most people believe, they don't see light or colour the same way as you humans do. But then the Mantis Shrimp enters the room. This little critter, that's about the size of my middle finger, has 16 different types of colour receptive cones. Not only can they see things in nature that we can only dream of, they are seeing things that we may not even know exist. We know they can see polarization, but no one can figure out the benefits in nature. Mechanically, the discoveries from this could give optical storage devices capabilities orders of magnitudes better than Blu-ray. But, as I said a few weeks ago, this type of mechanical data storage has been outdated. It's seen its best days. And it's not only polarization. These little guys can see multispectral images, way past what we can see in, or what we call visible light. And while at the moment no one really knows how far in each direction these little critters can see, but there are some hints, and I'll get onto those in a minute. But let's just remember what light is a very small part. What visible light is a very small part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Now, in 2014, researchers at the Uni of Queensland discovered that the Mantis Shrimp can see cancer, and that alone is just brilliant, especially if this can be replicated somehow into a piece of technology. But they also say the little buggers can see neuron activity. Again, this is an animal the size of my middle finger that can see me thinking. So I wonder what it sees when it looks up into the night sky. Now, to finish this story off, nearly every time, for some reason, when we talk to science talking dudes about the strange features of life, someone always asks, what's the evolutionary advantage of this, that, or the other? Which in itself sometimes can be a bit of a silly question, because most people, and I include myself in that lot, to some extent don't actually understand why we evolve or what's the benefit of evolution. What we never ask, though, is how does this relate to natural selection? This is where evolution, or in Herbert Spencer's words, survival of the fittest actually happens. Now, survival of the fittest does not mean who can run the 100 metres the fastest. We all know the answer to that. Or which caveman can ride the T-Rex the fastest. No, survival of the fittest is the fittest colony, the fittest group, the fittest pack, the fittest herd. And by the fittest, in this case, we are talking about species mass. The more there are of a species, the more chance that species has to survive. The species that survives the best is the fittest. This may not be quite what Darwin or Wallace had in mind, but when it comes down to it, Charlene the shrimp is looking for a very certain traits in her little shrimpy dalliances that will be passed on to her offspring. And human animals are no different, and in the days of yore and postmodern yore, sexual selection for breeding was based on offspring that would benefit the tribe. So disabled or weak babies were murdered, and the boy babies that were better at making patterns out of stars than fighting or hunting were often exiled or just kept long enough to get some nice marbling into their meat and used as food. There's evidence of not only humans doing this, but others in genus Homo and even other primates turning to cannibalism for one reason or another. So homos have been eating homos for millions of years. But thankfully, times have changed and you humans get to bump uglies both for fun and procreation. So do us all a favour. Swipe past the pretty guys with the hot bodies and make the babies with the guys with the hot brains and make a generation of babies that will be able to work out what's going on up around Tabby's star and what all the dark matter and energy is and what the fuck Charlene the Shrimp has seen with all those cones. Here, let me get you in the mood.
Who is it?
It's the plumber.
Plumber? I didn't call a plumber.
Okay, Andrea, let's see if you can get through this story without saying fuck you, Pope and Shites.
Fucking doubt it.
So this comes from secularism.org.uk, which is the home of the National Secular Society. So the story reads, one of the most senior cardinals in France, Lyons Cardinal Philippe Barbien, has been told by the prosecutor that he will not face charges following allegations that he had failed to report suspicions of child abuse by a priest under his control, as is required by French law. So Bernard Prainer, a priest in his diocese, was charged in January after admitting to sexual assault on 4 Boy Scouts between 1986 and 91, crimes which his lawyers say he can no longer be convicted of.
What the fuck?
Yeah, well, I'll get to the reasons why, but basically they've gone past the statute of limitations.
So providing you stay low after committing a crime,
yep,
you can get away with it?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, and there are thought to be many more victims, as is always the case. But so the Associated Press has reported, as I said, the statute of limitations has expired for some of the allegations against the Cardinal, and the evidence for other accusations was not sufficient. Now, I talked about this a little while ago in one of the, maybe the 5th or 6th episode, I can't remember, the amount of money that the church has actually invested in trying to hide cases and fight cases that they know they're guilty of is into the billions of dollars. It's absolutely
And you know
pathetic.
what? They've got the money to do it also.
Exactly. They've got all the money that George Pell, King Pedophile, is holding. So George Pell's the Pope's master of coin, and he's the one that Australia wants to get back into Australia to answer very, very similar questions on. And good old Pope and Shites and sitting there protecting them all.
You wonder why I stick my head into a yoga mat once a week.
Oh, no. So anyway, in May, at the height of the prosecutor's investigation into Barbara's actions, the Pope said publicly that it would be nonsensical and imprudent to seek the Archbishop's resignation at this stage, although Cardinal Barbarin admitted last month to errors in the management and nomination of certain priests while vehemently denying any cover-up. Except for he covered it up. Soon after the Pope's comment, on the very day of an important court hearing in the charged cleric's case, the Pope gave Barbarin an audience. La Parole Libérée, a French group representing survivors, claimed that the legal proceedings will now be overshadowed by this meeting. The group had earlier sought a meeting with the Pope, but, surprise, surprise, was denied one. They say we would have liked to have been received instead of the Cardinal. We note that once again, it's the victims that are sidelines. And that's what we keep hearing, that this Pope is the most progressive of them all. But he's having an audience, or he's granting audience to the offenders, but not the victims. Anyway, to finish this off, Keith Porteous-Wood, now he's the executive director of the National Secular Society, said, given Barbarin's admission of mistakes in handling of abusive priests, he has been exceptionally fortunate in having escaped charges over failure to report suspicions of child abuse. He finishes with, we can only hope that the prosecutor treated him in the same way as they would have done of somebody who was not a senior cleric and who had not had the Pope speak on their behalf. Okay, so I'm going to rant on in a bit about Brexit, and it's a very long rant, so if you're not interested in UK politics, I will not be offended if you skip ahead. But, Andrea, do you remember when The Sun, that bastion of news and integrity, ran the story about the Queen backing the Brexit?
Did the skip ahead not count me in? No.
No, you're here as well.
Sorry, go on.
So, do you remember that story? The Sun.
Oh God, yeah.
Said that the old Queenie was in favour of the Brexit, which we all knew at the time was bullshit.
Got a bit of propaganda.
Yeah, her Madge is actually very good at not dipping into politics, unlike her Dumbo-eared son, the future fucking king. That hurts me to say that he is going to be the king of the United Kingdom very soon.
You don't know.
Anyway, the shit hit the fan, and very much out of character for the Queen and the palace, they formally intervened with a grievance. Well, Nick Clegg, without raising an eyebrow last week, confirmed what everybody had figured anyway, and that was that the little lapdog Michael Gove was the source of the leak. I think I'm a pretty decent skeptic, but with no other way of confirming this, I have to be pretty confident in what Nick Clegg says is the truth. I'm not his biggest fan, but I'm pretty confident with his honesty, especially given that the statement, if not true, is the textbook definition of libel. The article in The Sun said two unnamed sources had claimed that the Queen made critical comments about the EU at two private functions. First with Nick Clegg at a lunch for Privy Councillors at Windsor Castle in 2011, and at a reception for MPs at Buckingham Palace, she was said to have let rip, in the words of The Sun, at the then Deputy Prime Minister and informed him of her belief that the European project was heading in the wrong direction. Now, all this come out in a really, even for the BBC, really crappy documentary last Monday that was basically a really crappy show reel for the presenter. Anyway, during the interview, Nick Clegg said, Michael Gove obviously communicated it. I know he did. He gave this to The Sun. Now, when asked by the presenter whether he knew Mr. Gove leaked the story to the newspaper, Clegg responded, yeah, he leaked that, and I can see why he might think that it's an interesting thing to do. Try to drag the Queen into it, but that didn't happen. I mean, the idea, this is Clegg still, he said, the idea that the Queen, of all people, would even bother to give somebody as insignificant as a here today, gone tomorrow Deputy Prime Minister, and Clegg talking about himself in that statement, a tongue lashing about Europe is just, I think, so preposterous. So again, a referendum won on lies and deception. I keep saying it. Please, America, look at what we have done and don't make the same mistake.
Because there's no going back.
There's no going back. And that's a really good point there. Jerry Springer said on his podcast this week, better than anybody could ever do, that if you vote in Trump, it's not just 4 years of Trump and some giggles along the way. He's talking about tearing apart the fabric that is America. So think about what you do in November.
Have your own mind and don't be afraid to believe absolutely everything you see on the social media, your newspapers and TV.
So let's get into some Brexit detail. I guess the best place to start is the economic fallout. As I have said many times beforehand, the economy was always going to suffer. A few weeks back, someone posted a picture on Twitter of his currency exchange receipt from sterling to euros. And after fees, he basically got a one-to-one exchange. Now, in June, 2 weeks before the referendum, I was getting 131 euros to the pound. So Let's call that a 23% drop, but that's a short-term problem. It's moving, I think today it's around 1.15 and will probably settle back around the 1.2, where it actually should be. The longer-term problem is things like pension funds. They have taken a massive hit, and the people that thought they were going to retire in some comfort may need to consider working a few more years. Well, it works out to be about an extra 7 years of working life for anybody that was thinking about retiring this year to make up the deficit. The other big issue is the bank interest rates. Now, it's very good for mortgage borrowers, but not so good for the savers. The official bank rate last week was dropped to 0.25%. And now some of the UK's leading banks are talking about negative interest. That means if you have any money in the bank, you'll be paying the bank to hold it for you, rather than you earning interest on your money. Now, unfortunately, or ironically, the demographic that are affected the most when it comes to pensions and savings are the over 60s, the same group that significantly voted to leave the EU. And one of the other talking points before the referendum was the UK's status in the single market. The Leave side said that it would still have access to the market without the rider of having to allow open or free movement of labour, i.e. open borders. And they cited the Norwegian model. But nobody listened when Norway said, don't be a fool, it doesn't work. It won't work for the UK, it doesn't work for Norway. Anyway, Boris and his little lapdog assured the kingdom that we would still have access to the single market and would also have separate free trade deals with other countries. But 52% of the nation must not have listened when the US said no way, or when Germany and France and the rest of the EU said it was not going to happen. It's access to the single market with free movement of labour or nothing. And something else that's very important to know and consider is that a single market is not the same as a free trade agreement. FTAs are designed to overcome tariffs. A single market goes several steps further, which, amongst other things, ensures high-quality products and safe products. Fair trade agreements don't cover this. And that was another issue that people voted away from. Product quality measures and other legal requirements that are part of the EU's legislations was sold to the people of the kingdom as a bad thing. They said it restricted manufacturers and manufacturings. That's bullshit. It ensured quality compliance. It ensured that battery chargers didn't explode and kill people. It ensured that children's Halloween costumes didn't combust. The restrictions on fisheries were there to ensure longevity of stocks and longevity of the industry. And the reason we can't now get Super Sucker Dyson vacuum cleaners is that they are bad for the environment. But because of all of a sudden it's now acceptable for a politician to tell outright lies to voters with absolutely zero recourse, we are, as a nation, fucked. Anyway, smart people with really awesome calculators figured the UK would be at least 20 to 40 billion pounds per year worse off in the case of a Brexit. At least 20 to 40 billion pounds. But now that everything's beginning to take shape, and considering the very early market results and the rest of the world's steadfastness on trade deals, this figure has now been recalculated to £75 billion per year. That's right. The UK will be £75 billion per year worse off. That, for those playing at home, that's 4% of the UK's GDP. Gone. And what's happened to the people that told the lies and hid the truth? Well, one got a cushy cabinet post. The other, well, I'm sure he's doing exactly what his overlord and wife has told him to do. And I guess it's no surprise that after the Brexit decision, along with the pro-Leave politicians that actually matter, Nigel Farage has gone dark for a little while. That is, up until now, when his mustachioed face made an appearance last week, along with an anonymous open letter written in The Independent from an old school chum of his from back in the day, wondering what we are now creating as history may have been different. We all know now that the Brexit referendum was only ever agreed to shut down Farage's moaning. Cameron had no idea that it would end with this result, And we all now know, well, that is to say anyone who actually cares to listen to the evidence, that this was won on a billet of hate and bigotry and lies from upon high. And in some respects, especially for Boris, it was all a game. He didn't think that he would win either. As it is with his orange doppelganger in the USA, he knew that he would have got more mileage out of losing than winning. Now, as a side aside, many people don't or won't know that Boris, in a roundabout way, is actually a half-decent historian. What Boris didn't or couldn't have known is that he will go down in history as the guy that gave the United Kingdom's harvester of bigotry and hate the result that he needed. I always thought that Farage was a dumbass. Well, it turns out, no. He opened the gates just enough for the actual politicians to get in and do all the dirty work for him. Anyway, to the letter. I'm sorry it's long, but it's well worth listening to. Dear Nigel, I won't give my name. My family isn't even aware I'm writing this and I wish to protect them. But I have a funny feeling you know who I am. At school, at Dulwich College in the late 70s, we were close friends in our teenage years. I stayed at your house once and your mother did a fantastic, great British breakfast for us. I remember the way you enchanted people at school, senior teachers and fellow pupils alike. Your English project on fishing enthralled everybody. I remember mine being particularly boring. You were and are a great speaker for sure. But I also remember other darker things about you. There was a time when I used to look back and dismiss much of them as the amusing naughtiness of teenagers as we were, much like our old headmaster David Ems did. I haven't chosen to write before, but I simply have to now. I now wonder if there is a connection between you at 16 and you at 52. I don't believe you have fascist sympathies now, but there are things that tell me your views might not have changed that much despite the many years. I think there comes a time, however difficult it may be, when enough is enough. I remember those school days in the UK. As you know, teachers were concerned. You'll remember being confronted 3 years ago by journalists who had a letter from the school teacher Chloe Deacon to Mr. Ems. You remember she was concerned about fascist views. Other teachers had concerns, but none of them would have known you like your own peers, the friends you used to spend time with. We hear much of due diligence in today's financial world, but had the teachers and headmaster of Dulwich investigated the concerns around your appointment as prefect with your peers, as they would hopefully today in similar circumstances, they might have made a very different decision. They might not have brushed them under the carpet. They might have made you think a little more about your rhetoric. History may have been a little different today. For I vividly recall the keen interest you had in two initials of your name written together as a signature and the bigoted symbol that represents from the many doodles over your school books. Nigel Farage, NF, National Front. I remember watching you draw it. Just a laugh, eh, Nigel? As a son of an immigrant family, your frequent cry of send 'em home and mention of the name Oswald Mosley didn't mean much to me either until much later when I learnt of the British fascists. I remember you spending hours with spit and polish producing what were unquestionably the brightest pair of army boots in school. I also remember your snuff tobacco that you kept hidden from your unwitting teachers. But I also remember something altogether more alarming, the songs you chanted in school. In her letter, Chloe Deacon mentioned reports of you singing Hitler youth songs, and when you were confronted by that, you denied it. But I do remember you singing the song starting with the words, gas them all, gas them all, gas them all. I can't forget the words. I can't bring myself to write the rest of it, for it is more vile than anything the teachers at Dulwich would ever have been aware of. I too think that things can be in the past and that people can grow up from being naughty school children. Heaven help us if they didn't. Let's face it, but heaven help us if we believe all children do. As someone wanting the EU to be challenged more robustly, I found myself thinking, good on Nigel for the amusement of your speeches in the European Parliament. Let's face it, mass migration and its management by the EU has been a constant mess of mixed messages. You're absolutely right to challenge the EU. It's just people need to see the full picture before aligning themselves to strangers, however charming their messages are. From being a real fan, I found myself thinking more and more with every appearance of yours on television that we must be aware of false prophets. Notably, the image of a desperate line of refugees, photographed not even in England, showed me that Nigel Farage has perhaps not changed that much. These people were used as live currency to further your cause to represent Britain being a breaking point for European immigrants. Although these people were from outside Europe, the imagery of a loss of control, hopelessness of our own politicians not caring for us is the stuff of 2 world wars. I can hear you say useless in the way that you used to. As I've said, the immigration issue surely needs fixing, but you have shamefully used this picture. Seeing your gloating display post-referendum at the European Parliament just rammed home the point. It seemed here we had a bit of the Nigel I knew at school. Yes, you fought 20 years, and no one took you seriously, but let's have some humility. We now learn that you will start touring other EU countries, beginning in Athens in September, to encourage them to follow your lead. I'm sure the neo-Nazis in Golden Dawn in Greece will cheer you loudly. The people of Greece, beware. For the record, I'm not a blind Remainer. I'm more of a 51% reluctant Remainer. Yes, I see the many 21st century challenges with which the EU has failed to deal, immigration and over-involvement being the most obvious. Who cannot see that having no common policy to deal with hundreds of thousands of immigrants is going to strain the most robust of institutions to its limits? Who cannot see that the criminal elements within those hundreds of thousands are not going to use the cover of desperate people for their own personal gain or distorted beliefs? But then again, don't some politicians use the cover of people's strife for their own gains or belief? Would we, as a nation, not be alarmed if we were to find out that a Muslim politician or teacher, for example, had made references to forced repatriation or joked about beheading all non-Muslims as a teenager at school? Let's hope schools are now taking action on the kind of comments you made when you were at school. I'm also not a perfect person. I too couldn't help thinking, must we have quite as many people coming to Europe? But let me indulge you in the story. On a recent trip to Berlin, I found myself in a wonderful park in Spandau on the banks of the Havel. It was a windy day and the chap next to me was meticulously laying out some papers on a bench, but then a gust of wind sent them a few metres, happily straight into my hands. He was incredibly grateful and strangely offered me some orange juice and a banana. I felt a little embarrassed. And then I realised the papers on the bench were in fact asylum papers, and the orange juice and the banana in a park in Berlin meant more to him than I can ever imagine. He was a teacher of physics or something similar. It was the only thing I could deduce from his broken English. I tried a little German, but to this he just shrugged his shoulders and gave me a hopelessly lost smile. He was a Syrian filling out papers for his family, and had my appointment contact not have arrived a few minutes later, I could have spent all day right there. Perhaps he was in that infamous leave poster you exploited to so much effect. It's easy to tar everybody with the same brush just because of a few criminals. But neither am I someone with rose-tinted spectacles. Although this meeting in Berlin was a wake-up moment for me, I also know there are serious issues for Europe to solve. We really have been let down by our European leaders. Perhaps people found no other way to represent their dissatisfaction with Europe and the very many things that need fixing other than embracing you. Is it our fault? No. Sorry, there's never an excuse for whipping up some racial animosity as a means to an end. I think you're a troublemaker. You were at school, you are now, but we need to be aware of what's whipped up. In April 1981, we had the Brixton riots. They happened just up the road from our school. The images of rioting people, many of them from the racial minorities, made it easy to discriminate. Many people did back then. The National Front was hugely popular by comparison to today. So turbulent times back then, but you have not moved on. I agree with you that there are historic dates that change lives. I stood on the Berlin Wall on that wonderful day in 1989, and I have an 8mm cine film I took that never fails to choke me. The images of euphoria, loud noises, waving of flags of all colours, those are real celebrations, and for good reason. I congratulate the German people on their achievement in integrating two by then divergent cultures. It has taken decades rather than a few years, Helmut Kohl predicted, but from mutual animosity and envy on both sides, today the country bears little evidence of physical or societal differences. After the referendum vote, you called for an Independence Day to mark the result. It's an insult to those good people in the real world who have died fighting real struggles for independence. I hope the nation sees, just as I do, that we have allowed ourselves to be enchanted by the charismatic and populist against plainly obvious EU failings without any real thought as to the background and objectives of the people delivering the messages. The letter closes with, "Deja vu, I'm afraid." Now, apart from this being a very personal account of Farage as a teenager, it's a stark warning of what can be waiting around the corner. We have a man that, as a teenager, was happy to sing the songs of the Nazi youth. He adorned his school books with fascist symbolism and idolised the British fascists of the 70s. And the teen, as a man, has obviously not changed a great deal at all. And now that he has caused irreparable damage to the United Kingdom, he's moving over to Greece to lead them to the same end. Now, Farage didn't directly respond to the claims made by his former school friend. Instead, he said, "To say that this is going over old ground is an understatement. The period during which I was at Dulwich was highly politically charged with the rise of Thatcherism to the Brixton riots just down the road. There were many people at that time who were attracted to extreme groups on both sides of the debate." Yes, knucklehead, I'm sure there were, and I'm sure they've all grown up by now, and I think it's time that you did too.
Hillary wants to essentially abolish the Second Amendment. By the way, and if she gets to pick her judges, nothing you can do, folks. Although the Second Amendment people, maybe there is, I don't know. But I'll tell you what, that will be a horrible day if Hillary gets to put her judges.
Okay, so I'm guessing by now that you've all heard that last clip anyway, but we need to rewind to history, but don't worry, we're not going too far. Let's just go back about 8 years ago when the Only Way is Chelsea wannabe star Sarah Palin had graphics made with rifle crosshairs on anti-Second Amendment propaganda pictures. And one of those included the electoral area of Gabby Gifford, who was shot in the head by a lunatic that had a long-standing hate for Gifford. And thank all the gods she survived, but many people ask the question, how was Palin never called to answer for this? Well, if I'm honest, Gifford's attempted assassin was well and truly primed already. No one can honestly say if Palin lit the fuse or not. But now wind the time machine forward again, and Trump is telling the credulous that America is no longer great and it's all Hillary and Obama's fault. So don't tell me he didn't know what he was saying. He is doing what Bill O'Reilly did with George Tiller. Keep up the rhetoric and wait until someone that's just in the right amount of unstable condition does the dirty work for Trump, probably thinking Trump will thank him for it, much like his promise of paying the legal fees for anyone at his rallies that are charged for violent offences, as long as they were doing the violence against the anti-Trump protesters. And for the record, he never made good on that promise either. But perhaps he thinks he was too subtle with his hint at the Second Amendment nutjob, so he figured he would tap into the Islamophobia that's been poisoning the nation. I mean, fuck it, right? If he can't get a run-of-the-mill lunatic, why not find a racist lunatic in his crowd? So in what he probably thinks was a genius move, rather than blame Obama and Clinton for ISIS, he tells the world that Obama founded ISIS. Have a listen.
We unleashed fury all over the Middle East. And It was a terrible mistake. And then Obama came in, and normally you want to clean up. He made a bigger mess out of it. He made such a mess. And then you had Hillary with Libya. So sad. In fact, in many respects, you know, they honor President Obama. ISIS is honoring President Obama. He is the founder of ISIS. He's the founder of ISIS, okay? He's the founder. He founded ISIS. And I would say the co-founder would be crooked Hillary Clinton.
And just in case anyone thought that he was kidding, have a listen to this.
Last night, you said the president was the founder of ISIS. I know what you meant. You meant that he created the vacuum. He lost the peace.
No, I meant he's the founder of ISIS. I do. He's the most valuable player. I give him the most valuable player award. I give her, too, by the way.
But he's not sympathetic to them. He hates them. He's trying to kill them.
He was the founder. The way he got out of Iraq was the founding of ISIS.
They screwed everything up. You don't get any argument from me, but by using the term founder, they're hitting with you on this again. Mistake?
No, it's no mistake. Everyone's liking it. I think they're liking it. I give him the most valuable player award. And I give it to him, and I gave a co-founder to Hillary. I don't know if you heard that.
Yeah, I did. I played it. I
gave her the co-founder.
I know what you're arguing.
Let me ask you, do you not like that?
I don't. I think I would say they lost the peace.
Still not convinced? Well, later in the week, Dum Dum turned to Twitter and said that he was just being sarcastic. But as he is so wont to do, in his next appearance, not only did he take a dig at the media, who, by the way, are the actual ones responsible for feeding this troll. Here's a tip to the media. Just ignore him. The more you report on him, the more the insane in his group of minions are getting hard-ons. Anyway, after calling all the media corrupt, and maybe that's the first thing that he's said that's slightly true, he told the crowd, well, you listen and tell me what you think he said.
So I said, Obama is the founder of ISIS. Right? The founder. And these dishonest media people, the most dishonest people, they said, oh, did he mean that? Didn't he mean that? And after that, I'd say a lot. In fact, they like him so much because he's been so weak and so bad. I mean, he let this happen. They had 8 states, they had 8 countries. They're now in 28 countries. They're expanding. So I said, the founder of ISIS. Obviously, I'm being sarcastic. Then, but not that sarcastic, to be honest with you.
Oh, you better believe it. He meant every fucking hate-filled word of that speech. Now, he wants to send American citizens to Guantanamo Bay to be court-martialed. Civilians, court-martialed. America, please listen. How is it that an Australian living in Europe has more knowledge of the US Constitution than the giant Oompa Loompa that's running for President of the United States of America? It's called the 6th fucking Amendment, dum-dum. Right, so my final thoughts on this. I still think #loser Donald wants to throw the game. And every time he says something idiotic, well, now anyway, he's starting to drop points. But even if what he is saying now is just rhetoric to hurt his own chances, the nut jobs are listening to him. You don't have to look too far to see what damage it can do. Not far at all. Just rewind back to the part I told you to scroll past earlier, the boring stuff on Brexit. The hate and bigotry and fear and xenophobia that Nigel Farage inflicted on this country must be a stark warning to all of America. And Farage didn't want to win either. He had a 20-plus year career in politics of being the hard done by. A career set on getting his beloved homeland out of the EU. And what happens when he finally succeeds? He fucks off and moves to Greece to be the underdog again with a trail of destruction left behind him. Okay, so my final thoughts on this. Putin and Trump seem to be moist for each other, and Farage has also given Trump his support. The man baby in North Korea is fond of Dum Dum, and now we have the leader of the militant group Hezbollah supporting him. He quoted Trump at a rally in the south of Lebanon this week, saying that the presidential candidate's statements were based on facts. He said, this is the head of Hezbollah, he said that this is an American presidential candidate who is saying this. What he says is based on facts and documents. I'm not going to get into whether or not Hezbollah are a terrorist group or not. That's a show in itself. But just to give you an idea, Australia say that only their external security or military operations are terrorists, while the UK that says all of Hezbollah's military are terrorists, and the USA say that all of Hezbollah, including their political wing, are a terrorist group. So, for now, I will make the ruling. And that ruling is, especially given that their support for Bashar al-Assad, that they are probably more interested in world domination than peace. Anyway, guess what happens next? Well, Trump has unwittingly fed into the credulous acceptance of the leaders of such groups as Hezbollah that rely on the credulity of their members to ensure utter and irrational obedience. So, the Olympics are still on.
Yay! Nailed the trampolining, bitches!
What have you watched? What have you been watching?
I have watched the cycling, actually, with good. You. It was interesting. Heptathlon.
Yep.
Parts of that. Trampolining.
We did that. And the track and field last night. And obviously, Mo Farah has done it once again.
Awesome.
It was a great race. But remember, so last week we talked about the reporter that everybody's up in arms about because she wore a short skirt at the pool, ignoring the male commentator.
And can I just say, she wearing a short skirt. She was actually dressed really appropriately and very smart.
Yeah.
She looked very smart and like a presenter.
But now, so guess what they're moaning about? The Arab or Muslim
wearing too many clothes
on the beach volleyball.
God, why does anybody care?
Exactly. Nobody said anything about how fucking brilliant it is that in another time and not very long ago they wouldn't have been allowed to compete at all. But here they are, and people are moaning that they're not wearing skimpy enough clothes.
Why do people feel the need to just even comment on what people look like?
I want to show you a photo. Now, there was some comments about this, but not based on anything else, except for this person looked ridiculous. And you might not remember Cathy Freemen. She was the Australian middle distance, I think 400 metre specialist. And this is a photo. Just have a look. This is at the 2000 Games in Sydney.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that?
No different.
No. So, obviously, this is a visual medium, so for the benefit of everybody listening, if you don't know who Cathy Freemen is, just do a little bit of a Google, and I'll put a link to this in the show notes anyway. But Cathy was still is an Aboriginal Australian who was one of the best runners of her time. So she would do anything and everything, as I said, that she could to shave seconds off. So she's wearing a full skin suit, so ankle to elbow, all the way past her head. She actually looks like, So her, if you could imagine what the ladies at the volleyball were wearing.
It's the same,
Cathy's
but it's not black.
Wearing exactly the same thing. It's not black. It's green and gold because she's an Australian hero. And her head's completely covered. But nobody, except for how ridiculous she looked, and she does.
I actually vaguely remember this.
Yeah, nobody said anything about it. So this is all what it is, why people are now moaning. They forget about the girl at the pool. They're moaning about the women wearing their burqas. It's not really a burqa, but being completely covered because of Islamophobia, and that's all.
Was there no complaints about the extremely short shorts of the male swimmers? Out of interest,
no,
because they were tiny trunks.
Yeah. But I need to look at more details in it. But the French have banned what they call the burkini, which is actually a swimming costume for the Muslim women.
Burkini, is that a name, really?
Yeah.
Oh wow!
Yeah. I'll do some more. I'm going to do a whole thing on that. Yeah, but I mean, look, in Australia, if you go to the beach, you won't get covered up because you get burnt to a crisp.
Think back in the 1920s.
Yeah, exactly. And they were made of wool, so if you got wet, you just got towed under. Anyway, moving on. So you remember last week I had a bit of a moan and bitch about the tennis and how it shouldn't be. I don't think I said how it shouldn't be a Olympic sport, but the reason I think it shouldn't be an Olympic sport, and the golf, and in some instances the cycling, is that these people get paid a crap load of money all, day in, day out, all year for this sport. So they're already top of their game.
Do cyclists get paid a lot?
Some do. Some don't. Some get a pittance, and the UCI actually have a minimum wage, and I can't remember exactly how much it is, but it's very low. Like don't. It's not enough to actually survive.
I was going to say, I thought a lot had full-time jobs as well.
When you look at, so we talk about the tour type riders, the top line, the number ones, they'll be getting into, if not the 100,000, probably into the millions.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously, the world's biggest cheat and the world's biggest arsehole was on multi-millions.
Right, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Brad would have been, I wouldn't like to guess how much Team Sky were paying him, but then you've got the likes of the guys who ride on the track who really do need to supplement their wages.
Yeah.
So I don't mind what we had. So we watched the discus yesterday, and we saw, and that was brilliant. And I was taking the piss.
The showmanship and everything, the camaraderie, it was fantastic to watch. I
was taking the piss and calling it Olympic frisbee, but what we saw was a brilliant German. The guy who won was German. The guy who come second was Polish, and he was a big fatty fat, and he was having a ball.
Do you know what though? He wasn't a big fatty fat. He had a gut where most
had
athletes
a beer gut,
don't.
Didn't he?
So if he wasn't a fatty fat, he just didn't look like the ultra 6-pack.
Yeah,
tone type. He was normal.
The guy who won had the godly body, but he wasn't a smart ass or anything. Like he wasn't up himself. He played up to the crowd, and so did the Polish guy. And then number 3 was another German, and then he was cut and had a good physique as well. So there's one sport where you don't have to be, that godly body and ripped and
enjoy
all that,
a pint.
but they make no money. They're probably PE teachers at a school or something.
Kind of what the
like
Olympics
that.
is about, isn't it?
Exactly what the Olympics are all about. And I think it was, I can't remember when it was, I should have looked this up. Somebody tell me, Olympics, I think it was the 86 games, was amateur only, and then they let the professionals in, and then the American dream team in the basketball got in there and swept everybody out. The golf, the tennis. I don't want to take anything away from Andy Murray. I personally don't like the guy. I think there's much better and more talented sports people out there, but he gets the media because of who he is. Because for a long, long time, he nearly won for a long, long time. It's only recently that he
was Scottish for a long, long while, and now
every
he's
time
English.
he lost, we call him Scottish, and when he wins, we call him British. But there was another guy, and I did laugh. I must admit, I had a bit of a laugh at him, but I'm just showing Andrew a photo.
Has he seen a picture of you?
Yeah, well, it looks like a tanned meat. Actually, a little bit skinnier than me, if I'm honest. But he's the Ethiopian swimmer, and people they dubbed him the whale. They were being a little bit mean, but Ethiopia. I remember when I was in school, Ethiopia was absolutely ripped apart by famine and all. They've had everything happen to it. Another one of the reasons when people ask me why am I an atheist, and I point them to Ethiopia, one of the most Christian countries in the world, and for most of my childhood, we were sending care packages to Ethiopia because they had such an awful famine. That's not important right now.
Back to the swimmer.
The swimmer. And he's a chubby guy. And he was still halfway down the pool when everybody else had finished.
This is what I love, though. This is what I love. This is what it's about.
And now he's an internet hero. And
he's the Eddie of the Eagle of the swim.
He's the Ethiopian Eddie the Eagle of the pool.
He is.
Yeah, and that's why people will keep watching it.
Do you know what? But that's what makes people like you and me sat at home, pretending we're experts, by the way.
Of course.
Look and think, do you know what? Normal people can do this and go for it and give it a go.
Yeah. And good on the people. Look, he probably trains as hard as he can. He doesn't have the
trainers and the support in terms of the nutritionists, the dietitians.
Obviously.
Well, it depends. He might have a new way of doing things.
You never know. I mean, look,
He's not even that fat.
But in comparison.
Yeah, exactly. But again, we're sat there
he's
going,
anorexic compared to
do you know
me.
what? This is going back to how everybody needs to look ripped and have the perfect body and get to CrossFit, isn't it?
Well,
that apparently is fat.
Let's describe for the listeners what I look like, and be honest.
You are a big guy with a big beer belly.
Beer belly and big shoulders, and I'm tall.
You're a big, stocky, tall person.
So last year, what did I do? Now, still being I've put a little bit of weight on since I've not been training, but last year I did, was it 8 half marathons?
You did, and you did a marathon.
Full marathon.
You did a 63-mile ultra.
And a 20-mile mini ultra and a whole... And,
he did loads of races.
Yeah, so it's proof that a big unit that feeds himself on beer can actually do things. Now, I was never going to win any of those events, and a lot of the time I was bringing up the rear, but there's always got to be somebody at the rear, doesn't there?
I hope you enjoyed listening to Skeptic Smash Talk. Don't forget to look out for this main show, which is normally updated to SoundCloud each Monday evening UK time, which means it will be available on all other platforms, ready for your commute on Tuesday. If you want to keep in touch, you can follow and like the show on all the social networks that allow following and liking. You can get all the contact information you need at skepticsmashtalk.com. If you did in fact enjoy the show, please take a moment to leave a review and appropriate numbers of stars on iTunes, where you can also find the past and future episodes. But better still, if you really enjoyed the show, feel free to post the links and share the information with all your friends and get them listening too. So on behalf of myself and Jason, thank you for listening, and until next time, this has been the Skeptic Smash Talk.